When Blazing Saddles arrived in theaters in February 1974, audiences didn't quite know how to react. Some laughed until they cried. Some walked out in disgust. Some did both. It was offensive, outrageous, and unlike anything Hollywood had ever produced. Yet, 50 years later, the film stands as one of the greatest comedies in American cinema history. Behind its fart jokes, its racial satire, and its anarchic fourth-wall-breaking finale lies a story far messier and more fascinating than most people realize. A story of creative courage, studio panic, accidental genius, and one director who refused to let the system win. To truly understand why Blazing Saddles matters, you have to understand the world it was born into. America in 1974 was a nation in crisis. The Vietnam War had ended in humiliation. The Watergate scandal had exposed the corruption at the highest levels of government, and Richard Nixon was on the verge of resignation. Trust in authority had collapsed. The civil rights movement had won important legal battles, but racism remained deeply embedded in everyday American life, including, and perhaps especially, in Hollywood. The Western genre, one of cinema's most beloved traditions, still routinely portrayed white men as noble heroes, while everyone else existed merely as backdrop. Mel Brooks didn't want to simply parody that tradition. He wanted to blow it up entirely. The plot of Blazing Saddles is deceptively straightforward. A corrupt land developer, desperate to drive settlers out of a town called Rock Ridge, convinces the governor to appoint a black sheriff, fully expecting the racist townspeople to panic and flee. But Sheriff Bart, played with cool precision by Cleon Little, turns out to be sharper, cleverer, and more capable than anyone anticipated. What begins as a racist scheme gradually transforms into a genre-shattering rebellion, with Bart outsmarting both the villains and the small-minded community that tried to destroy him. On the surface, it looks like slapstick. Underneath, it carries a radical idea. That racism, when held up to the light of comedy, begins to crumble under its own absurdity. One of the key architects of that idea was Richard Pryor, who co-wrote the script alongside Brooks. Pryor was the most fearless black comedian of his generation, and he brought a biting authenticity to the screenplay that no one else could have provided. He helped shape Bart into a character who wasn't simply heroic, but was painfully aware of the absurdity of his situation. Pryor had originally been considered to play Bart himself, and in many ways, he was the ideal choice. But Warner Brothers refused to insure him due to his well-documented history with substance abuse and a recent arrest for narcotics possession. Without insurance, he legally couldn't appear on set, so Pryor stayed on as a writer, and the lead role passed to Cleon Little, a Broadway-trained actor making one of his first major film appearances. Little brought something unexpected to the role, a kind of measured deadpan polish that made the satire sharper rather than louder. Where Pryor might have played Bart with raw intensity, Little played him with irony and restraint. When Bart famously pulls a gun on himself to escape a lynch mob, Little doesn't overplay the moment. He keeps it calm, almost bored, and that control is precisely what makes it so funny. The performance endures because it treats Bart as a fully intelligent human being navigating a world of deliberate stupidity, which was exactly the point Brooks was trying to make. The casting drama didn't end there. The role of the Waco Kid, a legendary but washed-up gunslinger hiding out in the town jail, was initially given to Gig Young, an Oscar-winning actor with the right kind of weathered screen presence. But on his very first day of shooting, Young collapsed on set, suffering the effects of alcohol withdrawal. Production ground to a halt. Brooks, furious and desperate, made a phone call to Gene Wilder, with whom he had worked on his earlier film, The Producers. Wilder flew out the next day and started filming almost immediately. His performance as the Waco Kid, simultaneously spaced out, wise, and bone-dry, became one of the most beloved elements of the entire film. His effortless chemistry with Cleon Little gave Blazing Saddles an emotional center that kept the chaos from flying completely off the rails. Harvey Korman rounded out the central cast as Hedley Lamar, the oily, scenery-chewing villain orchestrating the plot against Rock Ridge. Korman played the role with theatrical commitment bordering on parody, walking the line between Shakespeare and sketch comedy without ever quite tipping over. A running joke in the film has other characters repeatedly mispronouncing his name as Hedy, a reference to real-life actress Hedy Lamarr. The joke was apparently too persistent for the actual Hedy Lamarr's comfort. She threatened to sue Brooks over it. He settled privately, then joked that she should have considered it a compliment. Meanwhile, former NFL defensive tackle Alex Karras delivered one of the film's most surreal performances as the dim but lovable Brute Mongo, a man who punches horses and rides in a town on a bull. Karras wasn't a trained actor, but Brooks needed someone who looked imposing and could play it straight. He nailed it completely. Brooks also cast himself in a small but memorable role as the bumbling governor, and he appeared again as a Yiddish-speaking Native American chief in one of the film's most audacious scenes. In a flashback to Bart's childhood, what appears to be the setup for a classic Hollywood massacre is interrupted when the tribal warriors begin speaking fluent Yiddish. The joke is jarring and surreal, but it carries a serious point. By giving indigenous characters a Jewish dialect, Brooks was directly mocking the way Hollywood westerns had historically treated Native Americans as faceless, voiceless others, never humanized, never given real language or identity. It's absurd on the surface and devastating underneath, which is about as good a summary of the entire film as you could ask for. The same spirit runs through the famous campfire scene, which became the first time in mainstream Hollywood history that flatulence was used as a full comedic set piece with sound effects. The studio hated it. Executives called it vulgar, lowbrow, and embarrassing. Brooks not only kept it, but actually went back during post-production and added more fart sounds after test audiences were laughing, so hard they couldn't hear the jokes that followed. His reasoning went beyond simple shock value. For decades, Hollywood westerns had idealized the cowboy as stoic, heroic, and almost mythically clean. The campfire scene was a deliberate puncturing of that myth, a reminder that cowboys were just regular, sweaty, smelly men who slept in the dirt and ate too many beans. The studio saw vulgarity. Brooks saw satire. And then there's the ending, still one of the most radical conclusions in comedy film history. Rather than wrapping up neatly within the fictional world of Rock Ridge, Blazing Saddles breaks through the literal walls of the Warner Brothers studio. Characters crash through sets into other soundstages, brawl through a Hollywood musical number, and eventually spill out onto real studio streets. At one point, the action continues inside a theater showing the very movie we've been watching. The characters become aware they are in a film. The satire folds back on itself and consumes the entire premise. It's pure chaos, and it's completely deliberate. That moment of self-awareness, the film acknowledging its own artificiality, set a precedent that can be traced in a straight line to Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and then all the way to Deadpool decades later. During the filming of that chaotic finale, something happened that perfectly captures the spirit of the entire production. As the cast runs out of the studio gate and into the street with cameras rolling, a man in a regular sweater walks calmly through the middle of the shot. He wasn't an extra. He wasn't in costume. He was simply a passerby who happened to wander onto a live film set. When someone pointed it out, Brooks didn't order a reshoot. He said simply, "Leave him in. It's funny." He was right. The man's baffled, oblivious presence added one more layer of beautiful absurdity to a scene that was already operating at maximum strangeness. He became, entirely by accident, a small piece of cinema history. Not everything made it into the final cut. The most talked about deleted scene involves Lily Von Stupp, the glamorous chanteuse played with comic brilliance by Madeline Kahn, and Sheriff Bart sharing a dark bedroom. Lily asks, in her exaggerated German accent, whether the rumors about black men are true. There's a pause. Then Bart's voice cuts through the darkness. "I hate to disappoint you, ma'am, but you're sucking on my arm." The joke directly confronts a long-standing racial stereotype, flips it into absurdity, and deflates it with perfect deadpan timing. Brooks has spoken about this scene in interviews, including one with Conan O'Brien, explaining that he ultimately felt it crossed the line from satire into something that risked overshadowing the rest of the film. He later admitted he may have overcorrected, even saying in one conversation, "Maybe I got scared." It's a rare admission from a filmmaker so committed to fearlessness. What makes all of this, the deleted scenes, the accidental walk-ons, the casting disasters, the studio battles, so remarkable is that it all adds up to something greater than any of its parts. When Warner Brothers screamed the final cut, the room was silent. No laughter. Executives reportedly called it career-ending and too vulgar for American audiences. The studio head, Ted Ashley, reportedly pushed for a quiet limited release with plans to let it die without fanfare. But Brooks had negotiated final cut authority into his contract, which meant the studio legally could not alter a single frame without his permission. He held his ground. The film opened in New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago, and the response was immediate and overwhelming. Theaters extended their runs indefinitely. Warner Brothers, realizing they had catastrophically misjudged their own film, scrambled to expand distribution nationally. By the end of its theatrical run, Blazing Saddles had earned over $100 million, making it the biggest comedy hit of 1974. What Mel Brooks understood, and what the studio could not see from inside its own panic, was that Blazing Saddles was not simply a film designed to shock. It was a film designed to expose. Every outrageous joke, every deliberately offensive moment, every act of controlled chaos served the same purpose: to hold racism, mythology, and Hollywood convention up to the light and show how ridiculous they looked. The film used humor the way a surgeon uses a scalpel, cutting precisely and without apology. It dared its audience to be uncomfortable and then dared them to laugh at that discomfort. It was lowbrow and deeply intelligent at the same time, which is perhaps the hardest combination in all of comedy to actually pull off. Blazing Saddles remains a film that could not be made in quite the same way today, and that itself says something important. It is a product of its specific cultural moment, a country torn apart by war, political corruption, and unresolved racial tension, suddenly confronted by a comedy that refused to look away from any of it. The fact that it worked, that audiences laughed and kept coming back, says something equally important about the power of satire to do what earnest commentary sometimes cannot. Mel Brooks didn't make a polite film about racism. He made a loudly impolite one, and in doing so, he made something that still resonates 50 years later, a chaotic, brilliant, deeply human mess of a masterpiece.